Welcome back to Court TV Live, along with Judge Ashley Wilcott. I'm Ted Rollins outside the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. What we're doing this hour is going through the document dump, if you will, the unredacted and released documents from the Bryan Kohberger investigation. These documents were released yesterday. We've been combing through them overnight, and we want to switch gears. We were talking about the condition of the bodies, the house, the surviving roommates over the last couple hours. Well, we're going to switch gears now to Bryan Kohberger. When he was interviewed by police, remember, he's arrested, he's arrested in Pennsylvania. So this picks up, I'm going to read it here from the transcript. Two officers from Moscow are there in Pennsylvania. And this is the verbatim of the report. This is a summation. It reads, Detective Gilbertson and I began by introducing ourselves and stating which agencies we represented. When I stated who I was, Kohberger stated, "You do look familiar." Detective Gilbertson and I prepared our note-taking materials, and Detective Gilbertson read Kohberger his Miranda rights. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he understood his rights, to which he replied he did. After collecting Kohberger's personal information and inquiring about any medications, Gilbertson and I began to speak to Kohberger. Gilbertson asked Kohberger about the SWAT operation at the house, to which Kohberger replied he was concerned about his parents and his dog. Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he was going to Washington State University, to which he replied he was. He made small talk with Kohberger about sports for some time. Kohberger stated he didn't follow sports or the WSU football much, but was a baseball fan. Let's pause it here. This Phil Harvey, classic interviewing, right? It's the you're making small talk, talking sports with the guy. Everyone in that room knew that the hammer was about to come down. What's your take on the way they approached the beginning of this interview?
Well, they're trained to try and establish rapport with anyone they interview. And you all know this as journalists, and Jack and I experienced this as attorneys. If you start a conversation by going too hard, too fast, you risk alienating the person you're trying to speak and get information from. So this is just a pretty standard interview approach at this point.
And, you know, as we're listening, yeah, go ahead, Ted, go ahead. What's your question? I have so many different thoughts.
I was just going to say, if you were following along with me on your copy, pick it up.
Yes, I would love to pick it up, because he then goes from that when Detective Gilbertson asks Kohberger what led him down the road of becoming a professor. And Kohberger stated it was because he loved being in college, and stated knowledge was far more important to him than money. Kohberger added that WSU had a good program to study under, and then said, "You guys know all about this more than likely." Kohberger then asked questions about University of Idaho and other Idaho universities before stating he didn't know much about Idaho or Washington and had not left the tri-state area much. He then returned to speaking about his focus on learning and how he thought he could obtain his doctorate degree. And now, in retrospect, hindsight, looking back at that, Jack Rice, I hear that and I think, wow, doesn't it say volumes? It was about knowledge more important than money. And I think that he wanted to commit the perfect crime. I think he so craved that knowledge that he was depraved enough to say, let me see if I can pull off that perfect crime and commit murder of these 4 innocent students. I think this is telling.
Everybody is driven differently, Your Honor. Everybody is driven differently based upon what's important to them and what drives them and what matters to them. And if you're going to do an effective interrogation, you need to determine who the person is in front of you. And if you can do it, you want more information on the front end before you talk to them than afterward. And what I mean by that is, if you know that money is not as important as knowledge, that intelligence matters to him, that being seen as important matters to him, that the idea that he's smarter than anybody else in the room, that matters to him. And when you think of it that way, it's critical, because what you can then do is start playing to that space. Take me more into that. What do you mean that knowledge is more important? Why does this give you that feeling? Where does this experience, this education take you? And how does that put you in a different space than you were before, or in a different space than other people are in? All of a sudden, you put him in a place where he starts to brag about who he is and why he's there. And frankly, why he's smarter than me. And regularly, I would be in a space where my response is, you're so much smarter than me. Can you help explain what that means? Because he desperately wants that space. I want to give it to him, because I want what spills out of his mouth.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly right. That's what they're doing here at the beginning of this interview. They're getting him comfortable. You know, he's uncomfortable inherently walking into an interview room after his house was raided and he's killed 4 people. He knows they're onto him, and they're doing their best to let him talk about himself. It goes on. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger about his move to Washington. Kohberger said he drove across country and wanted the challenge of driving cross country and experiencing it with his father. This is the move from Washington, apparently initially. Kohberger then said he took a different route back home with his father for Christmas break to avoid snow. Again, smartest guy in the room. Kohberger spoke about his travels and the risks of such travels in the winter. Kohberger then began to speak out about the beauty of the environment and its relationship to God and a higher power. We spoke about this for some time. And Kohberger said he was raised Christian, but was always a skeptic, except when confronted with the beauty of the natural world. Again, we're talking about Phil letting him opine about how wonderfully introspective he is, and just letting him talk. That's a familiar technique, is it not?
Yes, that's right, Ted. I think you nailed it. I mean, the fact that he is doing a lot of the talking here means that the interviewers are doing their job right. And because at this stage in the game, it's not like cross-examinations you would see on TV. Their goal is to just get him talking. And so by starting with that sort of small talk, banter, social rapport, to get his to gain his trust and comfort, then now he's in the position, now he's comfortable talking. They want him talking more than they do, because when they start asking questions, they want to be able to use strategic silences, changes of subject, and other tactics like that to try to get some information from him before he decides to stop talking or ask for a lawyer.
Yeah, and so that's what's interesting. We do have to squeeze in a break, gentlemen, but when we come back, we're going to be going through more of his interview. He thinks he's the smartest one in the room, so he says, hey, I really appreciate all the small talk, but can you tell me why we're here? Stay tuned. We'll bring you more of what he had to say.
Yet her story was cut short by an act of evil. I believe in a God whose justice is not bound by this courtroom. I find peace knowing that judgment ultimately belongs to him. For your sake, I hope one day you feel the full weight of what you did. I hope you take accountability. I hope you truly experience the guilt and you surrender yourself to Jesus Christ.
Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Judge Ashley Wilcott, along with Ted Rollins, who is joining us live from Boise, Idaho. Of course, Ted there yesterday for sentencing, there today. Also with us this hour, criminal defense attorneys Phil Harvey and Jack Rice. We are going through right now. We had just received the transcript of the interview that was held with the defendant after he was arrested. So this was December 30th, and the Moscow police, FBI were present interviewing Bryan Kohberger. And we've gone through with Ted and I some of the different things there, talking about small talk, so to speak. But I want to continue with that small talk because there was some language that stood out to me. Let's pick up with this. I asked Kohberger if he and his father made any stops along their way back to Pennsylvania. He told me they visited Colorado, but the main goal was to just drive. Kohberger then told a story, and that's exactly how it was written by law enforcement. He told a story about seeing an unmarked police car near Kansas City speed up behind him, catch up to another vehicle, turn on its emergency lights, and then drive away. Kohberger thought this was strange and was unsure why it occurred. If he's the smartest one in the room, Jack Rice, why is he now telling this story, identified by the police as a story, in fact, about police when he knows what he did? He knows he murdered 4 students at the University of Idaho, yet he comes up with this story. Smart or not?
Yeah. Well, I think the problem is that he's smarter. He thinks he's smarter than everybody in the room. So he's going to create this 3-dimensional storyline, and he's going to act, and we're all guessing. That's part of our problem. But the ability to simply lay that out is to say, would a guilty person tell a story like that? Right? This is somebody who's thinking, oh, well, it almost reminds me of The Princess Bride, where he's all of a sudden on the other side of the table going, oh, you think that I would only think that, but I know that you would think that I would think that, so I will think this instead. And I fear sometimes that with somebody like a Kohberger personality type, you're going to get narcissism, you're going to get condescension, you're going to get a lot of that. And as a result, what you're doing as an officer is you're just literally lapping it up, and you're doing that on purpose, saying, that's brilliant, I totally could understand. Tell me more about how that must feel or must have felt at the time. You're gonna extract from him based upon his weaknesses, his loss, his failure, or at least the perception of failure within, because people don't realize that he's as smart as he is. You use that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's pick it up there. So they let him tell his story, and his story is sort of a, hey, I saw some activity around me which made me nervous. It was almost an invitation for the detectives to say, yeah, I'll bet you noticed that, you homicidal maniac, but they didn't. They turned it back and asked him about his job. They said, basically, Gilbertson asked him about the job that he mentioned, bringing the conversation back to him about being a teaching assistant. So that allowed Kohberger to talk about how busy he was and how the funding package that came along with being a teaching assistant is what makes the extra work worth it. He said he then discussed ongoing projects with WSU, the Washington State University PD, and Pullman PD too, bringing in cops. Oh, I'm one of you, is what he's basically saying. Kohberger spoke more about how being a TA is essentially assisting the professors, and he, blah, blah, blah. His day-to-day, again, at this point, Phil, they want to keep him in this room as long as possible, because as long as he's talking, he's divulging little bits of his personality, and who knows where it goes.
That's right, and bear in mind, up to this point, they have been doing an extensive investigation, running license plate cameras, running license plates, subpoenas for online accounts. So they are seeking to keep him talking, because if he shares anything that is inconsistent with the investigation that they've conducted thus far, that gives them something to confront him with. It also provides them potentially a window to explore their own investigation. Okay, he's changing the story a little bit here on this detail based on other information we have, they might want to consider exploring that. And then, of course, if at all possible, every police investigator is going to try and obtain a confession if they can get one.
And Ted, this is what
it's also reminiscent, isn't it? It's also reminiscent of how many cases have we covered on Court TV where there was one opportunity for these officers to speak with a suspect, and then they lose it because all of a sudden they lawyer up. And so you know that, and that's always what you're trying to do, is divert that attention from saying, don't lawyer up. We're trying to keep you in a space that's at least your perception of safety, because every minute that you have, you allow the opportunity to acquire just a little bit more. Then you can start dropping in potential facts and potential timelines, because that's what you're trying to create. But patience is a crucial aspect of this.
And listen, you are identifying exactly what happens next. Law enforcement stretching it out to get him to talk as much as they can before he might say a lawyer, because Kohberger now takes it upon himself and stated he understood why we are engaging in small talk, but would appreciate it if we explained to him, meaning law enforcement explained to him, what he was doing there. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger why he thought we were there. He said he wanted Detective Gilbertson to tell him. Detective Gilbertson said we were there because of what occurred in Moscow, but he did not provide any further detail. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he watched the news. Kohberger said, I watched the news. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger why he thought I looked familiar. Kohberger said he wasn't sure and stated I had a familiar face and looked like someone he used to know. Detective Gilbertson then said we were there because of what happened in November just off the University of Idaho campus. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he knew what that was, to which Kohberger replied, of course. They are stretching this out. Weigh in, Phil, quickly, if you would, before we have to go to a break, about now it's shifting and Kohberger's putting it back on them.
And Kohberger tried to put it back on them, but as any good interviewer, they respond to questions with questions. And so they, at this point in the interview, they start giving him, they start wide and gradually narrow to try to get him to either acknowledge that he knows what they're referring to, which he did, or even better, if they would have loved it if he had provided a specific detail that they had not spoken to him, because that's what plays well in a transcript or a recording. They got kind of halfway there based on what we just read.
Yeah, Ted, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's intriguing, and it's really a tough dance, because you do want that moment with him, because you know they already have him, right? They've got the DNA match. He knows. You've just raided his house, and everyone in that room knows exactly what's going on, and it's this interesting dance going back and forth. We're going to get a break in here. Everybody stay tuned. We're reading this for the first time right now on air. We're going to read the rest of this interview with Bryan Kohberger in the state of Pennsylvania after they had him. What does he do? He's cagey so far. We'll see what happens next. Stay with us.
Two parents face a jury
over the attempted murder of their own daughter.
Court TV takes you inside the trial that's torn a family apart.
The attempted honor killing trial. Live coverage today, only on Court TV.
Tonight, on closing arguments, never before seen police investigative reports in the Idaho student murder case. Will break down the shocking new details.
Closing arguments with Vinny Politan tonight at 8/7 Central, only on Court TV.
He is a hollow vessel, something less than human. A body without empathy, without remorse. He chose destruction. He chose evil.
This is me. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ted Rowlands outside the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho, along with Judge Ashley Wilcott, Phil Harvey, and Jack Rice. We're going through the documents that were released by authorities after the gag order was released, and we're just talking about this interview that they conducted with Bryan Kohberger after they raided his house in Pennsylvania. They brought him in to talk to him. And when we left off, they had just told him that this was concerning what happened in that house in Moscow, Idaho. And this is where we pick it up. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger if he knew what that was, to which Kohberger replied, of course. When prompted to elaborate, Kohberger said, it was an incident we had been investigating for. How long has he been in? I'm not sure what that means, but Kohberger then said there were probably several incidents. He's opining, obviously, here, and then said he was aware of the homicide because of a Washington State University alert that he received. Detective Gilbertson asked Kohberger when he received the alert. Kohberger said he wasn't sure, but that he thought it was sometime the previous month. Detective Gilbertson confirmed that was why they were there and asked if Kohberger wanted to talk about that. Kohberger replied, well, I think I would need a lawyer. This is the first time Kohberger has flinched. Kohberger then asked if Gilbertson would explain to him what we were there for specifically. So Kohberger says, I think I need a lawyer, but then keeps the conversation going and says, why are we here specifically? And added that he was a little tired. That's when Gilbertson again stated that they were investigating the homicides of the 4 students and that we had questions and things we hoped that Kohberger would help us understand. So Jack and Phil, Jack, to you first. This is the point where they realize Kohberger is about to pull the plug on this thing. Your thoughts?
Obviously, what's critically important here is to get as much as you can, but you can't cross that line because we've seen this happen before, and in cases of mine, I've moved to suppress and been able to exclude pieces of evidence, and that's the last thing that the police want to do at this point. They're building a case, and the last thing you want is to actually mess it up at this stage. Hence, when he came back with that question of, you want to be more specific, that actually allowed them to come back, even though he referenced the lawyer. And then when he says it again, you realize it's narrowing itself down, and they're really almost done. But there was one statement he said, which I thought was interesting, that you read, when he said, we were investigating this. Is that what he said? Did he say we?
I believe he may have.
We had been investigating. They did say we, Ted.
Think about that second. Think about what it is when all of a sudden you have somebody who starts to see himself as part of the system that's stopping crime. He is part of it now. He's not a citizen. He is part of the team that's involved in law enforcement stopping crimes, investigating this crime. That is an extraordinary slip in my mind.
And it's hard to tell. I know Ted may agree. The context, it's hard to tell if that's what they meant or simply that he meant how long were they investigating, the we referencing law enforcement. Yeah. So it's hard to tell.
Here's exactly that line. Yeah, here's that line exactly. When prompted to elaborate, Kohberger said it was the incident we had been investigating. So I think he was saying, oh yeah, I know what it is. It's this thing that you've been investigating. So I get what you're saying, Jack, because it was a little unclear. Was he claiming that he was investigating? No, I think he was just sort of acknowledging that they were investigating it, and that's what he was aware of.
And now let's take into account twice he said about a lawyer. And here is more of the interrogation and the transcript that we're just now looking at. Kohberger sat back and said he had the utmost respect for law enforcement, but stated it was a constitutional right to speak to an attorney. Detective Gilbertson affirmed this. Kohberger then re-engaged and said the only thing he heard of from Moscow was an alert that came to his phone. Kohberger then said he wanted to talk to an attorney. That's time 3, he talks about an attorney. Detective Gilbertson said we would stop now because Kohberger wanted to speak to an attorney. Kohberger, though, can't stop talking because next it says, Kohberger then asked where his parents were and where his dog was. Kohberger re-engaged again and asked what questions we would have for him. Detective Gilbertson then asked Kohberger again if he understood his rights and asked specifically what Kohberger wished. Kohberger asked what specifically we wanted to talk to him about and the reason. I told Kohberger he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and we were not going to ask him any further questions. Kohberger asked again for the reason he was there, but added he would like to talk to an attorney. At this point, we concluded our interview with Kohberger and left the room. Let me just say, good for law enforcement. Cat and mouse, I think, is what Kohberger's trying to do in playing with them. And I think that, tell us what you think, Phil. I think that law enforcement didn't fall for it, quite frankly.
Judge, actually, I think you're right. I think they were trying to draw him out, and he is in turn is trying to draw them out. And so the way I read this, because it's not verbatim, it's really a summary. When prompted to elaborate, Kohberger said that there were probably several incidents, and that he's talked about this alert. But at that one moment, that one comment we're talking about, he said it was the incident that you had been investigating for, quote, how long has it been? It's almost like Bryan Kohberger is trying to get a little more detail. He's trying to satisfy in his own mind, is it the quadruple homicide? And they do give him that information eventually, which I think, in my read of this, is what Bryan Kohberger is looking for. And it's at that point he starts to talk about a lawyer.
Ted, why in the world, just quickly, would he not think it was about the 4 murders in Idaho?
Yeah, the whole thing was BS. I mean, everybody in the room knew exactly what was going on. But I guarantee you the detectives were close to saying, you did it and we know it. And they didn't get the opportunity because he brought up the lawyer too many times. When you bring it up the second time, you got to let him go.
Yeah. Boy, this was something. All right, that was his interrogation.